It's 6 o'clock. Let's rise and do the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll begin this evening with our Truth in Taxation hearing. Lori?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Funk, I'm going to go through required information regarding our taxes payable in 2019 for the school district as well as the 18-19 current year budget. This just outlines the variety of things we'll be discussing, as I just mentioned. This just outlines, maybe if I can get this, there we go, the things that we're required to discuss. This chart just clarifies how the levy cycle works for us versus other governmental entities. You see the school district is in the red bars there. So basically, our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th, which is different from city, county operate on a calendar year. Just a couple things to keep in mind regarding the school district tax levy. Great majority of the figures are arrived at through formulas set by state law. And there's another component which is based on voter approval. Such things for voter approval would include an operating referendum, which we do have, and voter approved bond issues for facility improvements, which we also just had, for example, last spring for the Hammerfield Halverson gym expansion vote. One thing I want to mention about the legislation involving this last legislative session is that the one thing that was a big news item was the passage of the state pension bill, and that actually is a great benefit to our employees that are on TRA and PRA retirement pension systems. But actually, as we'll probably notice later on in our audit report today, is that the results of that pension bill will actually, it'll be a couple years before it's actually reflected in our audits, as we have to wait till those TRA, PRA have their full cycle of fiscal years before it would be, the enhancements and benefits from that pension bill is reflected in financials that we see on our end. There we go. Here's an important statistic regarding the Gen Ed formula specifically and just funding in general for schools, is that the basic Gen Ed formula has not kept up with inflation, and this chart is showing that particular data piece. So compared to 91, 92 when this chart was put in place, up to now, when you take into account the inflation for the consumer price index, it's actually is a gap in funding where funding has fell short of the inflationary costs. So that gap is $1,416 per pupil. And that just is a way of showing that funding for schools should be a strong discussion item at the legislature, and we do need to see an improvement in the state funding formula for Gen Ed for the general fund. Next, I'm going to talk about the budget for the 18-19 year. Basically, the budget was published in the paper for what's called a budget publication report. And of course, the board approved it last June, the original budget for 18-19. Of course, the general fund is our main fund, and it reflects our daily operating costs, the salary and benefits of the instructional staff and support staff for all the general fund activities and operations, such things as utilities, and also certain funding streams such as the local operating referendum levy, which we do have in place. We have special funding sources such as health and safety, code compliance. We have to comply with handicap accessibility, asbestos removal. We have transportation, that's a service that is provided, and capital expenditures, all in our general fund. Other funds are food service, community ed. Community ed does have a levy component. They also have a state aid component, and their funding is driven by adult population and ECFE student counts, where the general fund, we are funded on the number of students that we serve. The construction fund comes into play in those years where we have a bond that's issued. And for the 18-19 year, it does reflect the building bond that was issued as a result of the bond referendum vote that we had last spring, and reflects the construction costs that we would anticipate in the next 12 months for those projects related to Hammerfield and Halverson gym addition, as well as a few enhancements at the high school. Another fund is debt service. And debt service, we have two components of it, the regular debt service fund as well as the OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits debt service fund. And that debt service does have a main levy component as well. This next chart reflects the total budget. This is the original budget that the board approved in June for the 18-19 school year. And there's a lot of data here. I'm just going to point out a few facts. That for the general fund, that's the column on the far left, total revenues in the general fund is budgeted at $49,155,000. And expenses are totaling $48,844,000. So a net gain of projected of $310,000 in our general fund. Kind of an interesting statistic for the general fund is that state aids comprise of 84% of the total general fund revenue at $41,511,000. That reflects 84% of the total revenue projected. Local levy, although it's a very important component of the general ed budget, is only 10% of our overall general fund revenue budget. Likewise, to look at our expenses in the general fund, since schools are a service organization, the majority of our costs are for staff. And the category of salaries and benefits, that comprises of nearly 80% of our general fund budget. So if you can read the numbers, a little small there, but salary and benefits come to $38,951,000 compared to our grand total general fund budget of $48,844,000. Another way to look at our general fund is to look at the instructional categories of the expense budget. So looking at the elementary, secondary instructional budget, vocational instructional budget, and special ed instructional budget, that comes to nearly 70% of our total budget expenses for the general fund. And that is very, very typical. Now to take a look at the proposed levy for 2019. It compares last year's 2018 levy at the $8,224,118 figure to the proposed 2019 levy, which is the $8,673,818. Those numbers reflect an increase of 5.47%, or $449,699. Now, of those categories, there we go. So this lists out the various categories of the levy and the increase. So some major categories that are driving this increase, the referendum, which is driven by an increase in enrollment, for example. We have operating capital is increased, and that again is due to an increase of enrollment. And the same thing with alternative teacher compensation, which is referred to as QComp. That QComp is driven by enrollment as well. Then another category is long-term facility maintenance. The formula is kind of like phased in over a number of years, and this is reflecting an increase of $169,000 to get us up to the regular threshold that the legislature has set for long-term facility maintenance. And other general fund adjustments of $49,000, just a variety of things that add up to that. And then in debt service, actually, that particular line item is due to, it's less of a fund balance adjustment than in prior years. There's always a reduction for excess fund balance, and it just is less of a reduction than it was in the prior year. That's what is driving that particular figure. So the 5.47% is the overall increase, as I mentioned. These key pieces that drove the changes, again, voter-approved referendums and the enrollment count is a major factor in the formulas. Levy adjustments from prior years are part of the calculation. Legislative changes for formula enhancements. Another important piece to consider or to be aware of is changes in market values, as well as changes in class rates and history. So to take a look at the impact on the taxpayer, there are a couple things to take a look at here. The first situation is taking a look at homestead residential property, and a unique nuance that happened this year is that even though the school levy increase is reflected as the 5.47% that I mentioned, but the tax base expanded. So when that levy is spread on the tax base, it actually, for the category of homestead residential property, for a $100,000 home, that tax went down. So on the far left, if you see the red bar and the blue bar for a $100,000 home, the red bar is reflecting the pay 18, so last year's taxes, the tax impact for a home, versus pay 19 for the new levy. So it's for a $100,000 home, it's going from $440 down to $437, and that's because this levy that's being proposed, the school levy, is applied to a tax base that expanded compared to the previous year. So this chart shows the different valuations of residential property and showing that actually that tax is going down for each value level. Another category is commercial industrial property. Kind of similar, it's a similar nuance there. In this situation, for evaluation, property evaluated at $250,000, actually the tax neutral. But for commercial property that's $1 million, it actually went down, or excuse me, went up slightly from $7,701 to $7,706. So it really depends on the property value level and how the numbers pan out. Another category is agricultural homestead property, and for a valuation of $625,000 of property, that tax impact is the same last year versus the new year in 2019, and so forth. You can read the bars for yourself there. The next graph I wanted to share with you. There we go. Is the agricultural non-homestead property. Just an example of $400,000 valuation of property going from $1,094, and that in this case it increases to $1,105. So it depends on the type of property, and of course it depends on as well what that property is valuated at in the 2019 market values. This just provides information on the various types of tax refunds. One thing I did want to touch on is ag credit. As we do have ag credit there was a topic discussed in the fall when we reviewed the proposed levy. And for ag credit, that is going to be a credit that is going to be of more help to farmers in a couple years once our OPEB debts payments are fully paid. And so, for example, that ag credit is 40%. So right now, ag to school credit is valued at $153,000, and in a couple years then, once the OPEB debt is paid off, that ag credit overall, as a grand total, would improve to $383,000. I believe I'm reading that correctly. So that is something that will help the farmers out in a couple years when we get to the Pay 21 taxes. That was a question in the past. I just wanted to point that out again. Any questions? It will be applied towards, so it is, for example, it is a credit that's applied on, it's supposed to be listed separately on the tax statement actually. So it would show the tax, and then the ag credit would be applied on that tax statement. Kelly, do you have that answer?
It's all, any bonded debt on ag property, homestead or non-homestead, will receive that.
That's Kelly Smith from Spring Center Financial Advisors.
Any other questions?
You mentioned a threshold when it comes to long-term facility management. Does that mean that we're maxed out at what we can ask for from the voters?
I believe this reflects the full entitlement this year, and I believe that is then at that full level.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to come forward and speak at this time? Or have any questions? If you want to come forward and state your name and address, please.
My name is Orville Johnson, 72868 255th Street. My question is this: what percentage of the student body uses the outside sports facilities? What percentage?
I can get that answer back to you. I don't have the exact percent off the top of my head, but a number of our students, be it soccer, football, track and field, softball, quite a few of our students use our facilities, in addition to our high school athletic classes.
I just wanted to know what percentage of our money is being spent by what percentage of students. You have my address. Please mail me that forward. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to come forward at this time? Okay.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that CPI and the state formula doesn't keep up with that. Is it also true that the state mandates certain programs that are expenses that we incur that add to that gap?
Yes, that's very true, and especially in the area of special education, where we have a lot of mandates and the funding formula is not fully funded. Like, for example, the cross-subsidy of special ed, which means the amount that we're entitled to get in special ed aid, but the state has not fully funded the formula, is like where the general fund revenue has to cover the gap, is like over $3 million of cross-subsidy, of which we're short. As far as we have expenses we've made, we're not getting the special ed aid to cover all those, so then the general ed aid has to help cover.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll call our meeting to order. And the first item of business is approving tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and second. All those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Pull same sign. Did you hear us, Angie?
Yeah, I had myself muted, but yes, aye.
Okay. All right. Next to our action items, we have a presentation on the audit report. We have Greg Larson and Lori.
Thank you. I had a chance to meet with the Finance Committee. We had a chance to spend about a half hour on the full report. So we're going to go through some of the highlights from the year in this executive summary. We can start on page 1. Just a little bit back, if we could. There we go. This is just some comments from some of the letters that are in the full audit report. The audit opinion was what we call a clean opinion there, so that's what you want it to be. The Yellow Book, there's some compliance letters. We didn't find any Yellow Book findings. Single audit, there's a single audit compliance and internal control letter. We didn't find any findings there. Same with Minnesota legal compliance. Extracurricular student activity funds, we had one finding in this. So if you're going to have a finding, I guess that's where you'd want to be. The next page 2 just talks about that a little bit. Student activity counts, there was 2 checks that were issued as a donation to a scholarship fund, and then the state guideline says you cannot, student activity counts cannot do a direct donation. So this was reviewed with Lori, and as soon as she knew about it, she had a meeting with the student activity advisors. I don't think this will be happening again going forward. There. The next letter is something called the communications with those charged with governance. A few things we're supposed to point out to the board. Basically, the significant audit findings, there was a new audit standard that was implemented this year related to OPEB, and we did review that with the Finance Committee in more detail. Counting estimates, there are two that are particularly sensitive. One would be the receivable for general ed aid, and the other one is for special ed aid. Those numbers keep changing every month up until probably February or March, so we took our best estimate based on the latest information that we knew about. Difficulties, this is AICPA language. We didn't have any difficulties performing the audit. Corrected, uncorrected misstatements. Any of you have worked with Lori Volz, you know she doesn't like any uncorrected misstatements. Pretty much everything has been adjusted. Disagreements, we didn't have any disagreements with management representations. Here is a letter that we reviewed with Lori Volz, and she signed that on November 15th, basically stating that the district had provided all the information we needed to do the audit. She was not aware of anything that needed further disclosures. Management consultation with the other independent accountants, this really wouldn't apply because you already have a clean opinion. Other audit findings or issues, this would be if during the year Lori Volz may call with a question. I assume she wants the correct answer. I'm not trying to guess which way she wants to answer it, so I still be her friend. I'm just trying to answer it the way that should be the correct answer. Other matters is just stating that there's some other information in the report, and we feel these are fairly stated. We don't express opinion on it, but I feel that that they are correct there. And then there's some other information here too. The next section here deals with some information here. Page 6 would show some information about the general fund and the breakdown on the different designated fund balances here. That's pretty small to read there, but the fund balances, unrestricted, includes assigned and non-spendable fund balances went up some this year. Non-capital restrictions went down, and then there's several related to the capital-related restrictions. Those three went down $319,000 this year, and then the audit report, the general fund balance, as you can see, as a whole went down $318,000. It's all related to those capital-related restrictions. And then the next several pages gives you some information about how your fund balances have done compared to the last 4 prior years. And so we have the unassigned general fund balance. That should be probably, we went a little bit too far there. There you go. So $6,243,000 is the unassigned fund balance, not including any of the other items there. This is the piece that the district can use for most expenses. And the district presently has a fund balance policy that you're shooting to get 14% here and that. And this year it computed to 13.85%. So it's very close. And meeting with Lori Volz, she mentioned that helped with your bond rating and actually helped reduce the interest rate on some of your bonds that you just recently issued. So that's a good thing. And meeting with the Finance Committee some of the people that have been on the board for a long time knows when the state of Minnesota has a shortfall, they oftentimes will borrow money from the school districts by using something called a tax shift. And right now that we're not in that situation, but I just feel it is good to personally to have a solid fund balance. 13.85% is not quite 2 months worth of cash flow. 8-point-some% would be 1 month, so 2 months would be 16 or almost 17%. So you have about a month and a half of cash flow in your fund balance here. The next section we deal with operating capital fund balance. So you can see that one did drop this year. Food service fund balance, reviewed this with Lori a little bit. This one did drop some this year, and she's already has some ideas as far as funding for the future apparently when you have a snow day, that kind of affects the district because you're paying your staff even though the kids aren't paying for a meal that day, so that impacts that some. We're just starting winter, so who knows what we're going to have this year. We'll see. Community Service Fund is the next one here. That one has improved slightly the last couple of years here. Debt Service Fund, you can see the fund balance there has improved. The next item on district's average daily membership. This is a pleasant thing to see, the trend that you've had the last 5 years. It doesn't happen all the time in outstate schools, but your district has shown some improvement, so that helps with everything related to your funding here. So that's a positive sign there. Page 10, this confirms what Lori said in your levy meeting. This shows the breakdown on your general fund revenues this past year. The state aid accounted for 84.48% of your revenues this past year. The federal aid was 3.46%, other revenues 2.69%, and from property tax revenues 9.37%, so a little bit under 10% coming from the tax from your local taxpayers. The big part is coming from state aids. And the next several charts we have is a breakdown of some of the expenses, comparing them to all the schools in the state of Minnesota. And then the right-hand column would be districts with students from 2,000 to 3,999 of average daily membership. So you can see the different tables here. This is giving information for your local district the last 5 years compared with the statewide average for all schools, and then districts of similar size. Regular instruction on the next one shows, again, the numbers for your district compared with all schools, and then the larger districts more similar to your size. Vocational instruction. And the one that kind of blows away is special ed. Lori's been aware of this as something your district has always been higher than the statewide average for special ed. Cost by a fair amount here, so just information for you to see. Instructional support services, this year closer. Last year you had a kind of a blip in the cost there. Sites, buildings, equipment, and other, showing that your average cost is higher than what the statewide average is for whatever reason. There, the pupil support services. This is excluding transportation, and Lori mentioned she was aware of some additional costs in this area this year. You said there was some additional costs.
That is, for example, when we added the elementary counselors, that is reflected in this program area. So that's why in 17-18, that number spiked up due to the added service we were providing in that category. Transportation cost, a little bit less than the statewide average, but just above the schools of similar sizes. And then the food service right in line pretty much with what you're seeing across the state of Minnesota. And then the one that's unusual, actually optimistic part here is the debt service. For the past year, your costs are under the statewide average and under districts of similar size. I believe you just paid off the last payment on your high school building bond, so they'll be replaced with some other bonds going forward. So I went through that very quickly. I don't know if there's any questions on anything. As I pointed out to the Finance Committee, I felt the district did have a very good year. Your fund balances have maintained across the board, and then the unassigned fund balance is very hard to keep that to maintain where you're at, but it has been maintaining itself very well. So I'd like to thank your staff for the help they give us while we're working on the audit. You had a person that had a little bit of surgeries towards the end, but we did a lot of work with her before she was off on her recovery. But the staff as a whole are very nice to work with.
A
Questions?
Question on page 13,
Okay.
with the site, buildings, equipment, and other. What would be some reasons why we would be consistently far above the state average in that category?
I'm not sure why that would necessarily be, and this is the average age of your buildings. A lot of school districts in the state of Minnesota do have older buildings, so I'm not sure why that is. You've spent a lot of money on your updating of your buildings as far as heating them and things the last few years, so I was a little bit surprised because I thought that would be a little bit down too, but, because it would mainly be the cost of maintaining your buildings and sites and then some equipment, unless you've been updating some equipment in that area more than other districts. But no, I don't have a good answer for that one.
I believe that category is everything that's in the 800 series.
Yep, yep,
Which would include improvements in operating capital, right?
yep.
Is how
Oh,
you
the
measure it?
long-term facilities.
The long-term facility maintenance.
Yep, that would probably go in there, yeah.
Include all utilities and like the custodial staff would all be in that category.
Yep, the facilities maintenance is probably the one, because you mentioned you started that project early to get it going.
Right. Like for example, there we go. In June, we had the start of the construction for the Halverson roof improvement. And so that was advanced 1 month, you could say, because the revenue for that actually came in place on July 1. So that element would be part of it. That's it, or a big part of it.
So you're saying 1 month that would have been in the 1 year was moved up to a different year, or is moved into this year from next year?
So for example, the reserve for LTFM ended up being a negative 200,000, and that's because the Halverson project, we had to move up in order to get the project done before school started. We had to start the project in June, but the funding for it comes into the new year, 18-19. So we'll recapturing that. I mean, the reserve for LTFM will end up in a positive at end of June 30th of 19. But that project, we had to start early on it, and that would be part of what's showing an increase in that category.
So, did you say that most of this income then comes from the LTFM levy? So would that mean that other districts don't levy as highly as we do in that area, or?
No, I would have to probably go back. We could do some more analysis in this category, but the increase from the 974 up to 1,020, that increase would most likely be mostly attributed to the fact that we did that one LTFM project a little bit early.
Would it quite possibly be the case that then next year our balance is going to look a lot better than it should?
Right. It'll drop down.
But this is a pattern that's been for the past 5 years. It looks like that we've been over, so just wondering if
The
there's...
long-term facilities maintenance has only been in place, I think this is the 3rd year.
Yeah.
So even if we go back 3 years, this takes into more than that into account. So Lori, why don't you try to dive into this and
Sure.
get an answer for us?
I'm guessing maybe part of it, I haven't had a chance to look, but you've done a lot of facilities updating as far as the HVAC systems, and I'm guessing your cost has maybe been higher than other districts, but I can't say for sure. I just know you have updated HVAC systems at a lot of buildings, and there's been some major costs. That one of the things that shows up in the full audit report is something called construction in progress, and this year is only 300,000, but 300,000 divided by the number of your students is almost $100 per pupil, and that was the part so that can help explain this year. But I'm thinking if you look back at all those HVAC costs, and divided by the number of pupils. I don't have the numbers for all the schools in the state of Minnesota, but I know you've had some major HVAC costs over the years here. But
Okay, any other questions? Okay, this is an action item to approve the audit. Okay, is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the 2017-18 district audit signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries. Next, we have resolution. I'm going to cut it short here so I don't read the whole thing, but a resolution to pay off general obligation taxable OPEB refunding bonds and go to new ones, right? Is that a good summary?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Funk and Deputy Superintendent Volz, I'm happy to be here tonight to report on your OPEB refunding bond sale that was held this morning and ask for your approval of the low bidder tonight. I believe you have a single-page document by your seat here, and that's just a quick summary. I will run through this. Just a little background, these were OPEB bonds that were originally issued in 2009 and had an 8-year call window, so they were not eligible to be refunded until recently. And they will be fully paid off in 2 more years, so there was fairly short amount of debt remaining in this. So as we started this process, interest rates had been rising, and we had numerous conversations about should we move forward because the savings may disappear by the time the sale actually happens. The decision was made to move forward, and that was a good decision, and we'll see that on the results here. And you can see on the bottom of this page here shows the history of treasury rates, which the OPEB bonds are based on. We hit lows in the mid-2016s, and it's pretty much been rising since then. And then just in the last month, really, rates settled down and actually dropped a little bit, and you were that was good news for the Albert Lea School District. So on the second page, we held the sale this morning and had 6 bidders, which is a good number of bidders for an issue of $4 million range. Bidders were all typical entities that bid on these types of issues. It was a competitive bid process. Between the 6 bids that were received, the spread between the low rate and the high rate was 0.267, and I believe if I looked at the top 5, it was a spread of only 0.15%. So very competitive on those first 5 bids. Robert W. Baird and Company are the low bidder, and we will be recommending that you approve the sale to tonight. And then there's this chart here, and I apologize, I had a typo. I missed a spot here. It says August. We presented a set of recommendations to the district in October, so that should be corrected there. And we had, at that time, looking at the rates and what was happening with the market, we projected a true interest cost of 3.488%. The rate you got today was 3.109, so considerably lower than had been projected. The total savings, present value savings, was expected to be $33,534, and the results today were $58,820. So there will be a decrease in next year's levy, and then the following year as well. I should state that we sent a projection based on this $33,000 to MDE, so they've taken part of that off already. There will be one more adjustment as next year's levy comes, but it's too late to modify that on the current year levy. Lastly, just want to thank Superintendent Funk and Deputy Superintendent Volz for their work in, every bond sale requires a rating call and rating process. The district has used Moody's in the past. So we had a conference call, a lot of financial information had been prepared for that, and it's literally a 45-minute conversation about the Albert Lee area school district and community. What's happening in terms of economic development, in terms of your enrollment, what future projects is the district perhaps looking at. When all of that was completed, Moody's affirmed your rating of A1, which is considered an upper medium grade, so you're one notch below high grade, but A1 is a very good rating for a rural community of your size. As was mentioned in, I believe, the audit report here, that rating is important because the better rating you have, the lower interest rate you're going to see on bid projects such as this recent bond sale. So subject to the board's approval of Robert W. Baird as the winner in this bidding today, we will coordinate the final processing of the bond sale, and proceeds will come to the district February 1st. That will pay off the old bonds, and then you will have 2 years remaining on these new bonds reflecting those savings. And lastly, I just want to congratulate you on a good sale and thank your office staff and everybody involved for their help as we went through this process. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
The 58,820 is over 2 years, and I think it was 31,000 1 year, and then a little bit below that the first year. So that is good news for our district, and I think that when we had our finance meeting prior to this, we talked about our fund balance being close to 14% was a major contributor towards our rating, and so I think I just wanted to note that. So any questions? Okay, I'd entertain a motion then to move forward on this. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, any further
Roll call. I recommend a roll call.
Okay,
Yes.
further discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll start with you, Angie.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. And Ashley does have some signature documents for clerk, and then I think Lori, she has the sheets over already. Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next item is 3.3, and that's the 2018 pay 2019 final levy. Lori.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Funk, for your consideration now is approval of the final 2018 payable 2019 levy, which reflects the 5.47% increase, as I mentioned earlier in the Truth and Taxation hearing, which is also reflecting of the increase tax levy total of $449,699.46.
Okay. What are the wishes of the board? Is there a second? Okay. Any further discussion? Okay,
I just have a comment. I will not be supporting because I do not support full levy at the LTFM.
Okay.
I don't support the full levy at the LTFM, long-term facilities maintenance, in addition with the other levies that we have to increase our burden on the taxpayers.
Okay. We'll do a roll call vote again. Neil, we'll start with you. Aye. Jill? No. Aye. Aye. Angie?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next, we have a study session on Hammerfield. Lori?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Funk, just to give an update where we're at with the Hammerfield discussion, maybe I'll have Dr. Funk speak to the meeting he had today.
So I believe that there was a city council meeting last week where they tabled the conditional use permit for Hammerfield based on some questions that some members of the city administration had on the project. And we have had a number of meetings with them between our architects and our facilities folks and city planners. And so couple issues that came up that I think we've worked through this afternoon. One of the issues is in 2005, the city and the county, and I believe the school district, got together to talk about future enhancements to the Bridge Avenue. And at that time, they talked about taking out one of the entrances off a bridge to Hammerfield and having one entrance off Bridge and then another entrance off of Hammer Road. And this was well before Lori and I came here in 2009. And so this discussion took place. This was in the plans. So a couple years ago when they did the work on Bridge, the city and the county took out one of the entrances to Bridge, or to the Hammer Complex from Bridge. We didn't know what the big plan was until October, Amanda or Steve, 25th of this year about, when they said, well, our plan is to have an entrance off of Hammerfield, or Hammer Road, and one off of Bridge, so you'll have two in and out. Well, one of the safety concerns that we had as an administration, and which our architectural firm absolutely concurred with, was we have high school students flying through the parking lot, coming in on Bridge, going through, and then going out on Hammer. So we were purposeful about creating a drive-through circle area so people could be dropped off and then they would go back out. City's concern is, of course, on that for large venues, large games, we will not have it'll be too much of a clog and a backlog. And so what they would like to see is on a needed basis, as needed basis, for the school district to be able to open up that road from the turnaround and allow traffic, if needed on huge games, to go out through Hammer. And so working with Steve Yonke and Chad Adams today, we think we've developed a potential solution to that on an as-needed basis. We will have barriers put up, and then they can be brought down if needed to allow the traffic to flow through. A couple other minor things that came up. We have, for the field house, we have 20 parking spaces templated across the road from the field house. The city would like to see them right outside the field house, so we're looking at that. So you don't have to cross the road to get to the field house. And just a couple minor tweaks that we still need to do. So we're working on that, and we believe that with the plans that we discussed this afternoon, we'll be able to get city approval for the conditional use permit on Monday night. The other thing that was brought up at the council meeting that I just quickly want to address is the fact that we have 280 parking spots there, which is considerably less than what we have now. And we did not build it for the largest capacity game that we're going to have. You know, we may have 600 cars want to come to a homecoming game. Our average game is less than 280 parking spots. So since we're sensitive to the taxpayers and increasing this, we're not paving 600 spots, which would increase the cost by hundreds of thousands of dollars to have that large of a parking lot, especially when we have a huge parking lot just down the road at at Hammer. So one of the things, or at the high school, one of the things that we did talk about with the city today would be the potential to have a run a shuttle for big games. So if people don't want to walk or they can't walk, we could possibly shuttle them back and forth. So that is something we can definitely take a look at. Right.
We looked at that distance, and it's not really that far. I forget what it was.
It's not, but again, if we have,
It would be, I don't recall, what kind of lighting do we have along that path? It's a nice path, it's well lit. Yep. Wouldn't be a problem. If the bus, that could cost money.
When this was brought up in facilities meeting, they said that they would be parking in the grass area. Is that an option as well?
that is an option as well, yes.
How many spots could be temporary overflow spots? 100, 200? 80 some? Can we move like a tree and maybe get 100?
You're talking to the tree lady over here. I don't know about that.
Okay, any questions?
And why is this issue presenting now? The plans have been in place for a while. Was the city aware of the plans previously?
Steve or Amanda, you want to, was the city aware, how long, why is this suddenly coming up? Amanda, you want to come up? This is Amanda Prosser from ISG. She's one of our lead architects on the project.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So the question is, why is this being an issue now? So obviously the plans that, they've been in place for almost a year now. The overall layout of the site plan has changed maybe feet here and there from what was distributed to the public during the pre-referendum process. And so they've been in the public eye for a long time. As part of the permitting process through the city, the plans need to be to a certain point of completion and a level of detail that they need to be at so that we can submit them for review and approval. That occurred, I think it was like the end of September into October, and that was the first time that they really took a hard look at them and commented on them.
I guess that surprises me because I thought that they had been more involved in the planning and this discussion along the way.
The city administrator and I and the mayor and the board chair met in the spring when we discussed this, and we met with Bob Ferlin from the city as well, but we did not. This is kind of this is a surprise for me from a permitting angle that this was gonna pop up, because they were aware of the general concept. I would say last spring even. So I don't know. I think there's some procedural hurdles we have to go through, and that's what we're running up against with the city regarding the permitting piece of it.
And currently, the road that would go from the roundabout down behind the field house was only small for maintenance and emergency vehicles. So will this be a major overhaul of the plan?
There will be some minor tweaks, but the intent is that it would be a one-way drive as needed, and also used for, it was always intended for that connection to be for emergency and maintenance vehicles. The other piece of this is, we put forward the plan that kept the students and the pedestrians' safety, as our highest priority. We know that the current configuration, there are safety concerns there, and that's why we proposed the layout that we did. And we had always allowed, like I said, for that emergency and maintenance access should the need ever arise. And so, it surprised us too that this was a requirement, especially since we are reducing parking that is exiting out onto Bridge, and we are further distributing across school property. So when you look at it from that perspective, we are distributing that. We're solving the pedestrian issue, but still providing that emergency access. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that we're in this position, to be honest. But I think we can come up with a good solution here, and it sounds like there's a good meeting today. We can come up with a compromise.
And could we be informed of the activities director position status?
That has nothing to do with anything on the agenda this evening.
Oh, well, this is an athletic field discussion, so I've been hearing things and we haven't been informed of anything, so I'm asking a question right here in the meeting.
We'll be providing information on it.
And when can we expect that?
I'm not sure. Probably Friday update.
We haven't received an update for a couple weeks.
It appears that updates have been forwarded to people with confidential information in them outside of the regular channels, so we've suspended them for a while here.
Okay, so I return to my question of when we'll be receiving the information.
I don't know.
All right, I'll be requesting that information via email tonight then. Thank you.
All right, any other questions on the Hammerfield? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.